Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Pistons Backcourt Show. I'm John Niyo, columnist here at the News. I'm joined here by Rod Beard, our Pistons beat writer, also host of the Rod and Reel podcast. I think we got about 6 episodes in on that, and you can go find that SoundCloud, DetroitNews.com, wherever else you find podcasts. But we are here today to talk about the deadline. It came and went.
Did it?
And so did one significant member of the Pistons roster, Andre Drummond, dealt to Cleveland for not a whole lot.
One would say a bag of balls and some.
I was trying to be nice. John
Skittles.
Henson, Brandon Knight, former Piston Brandon Knight, and a second-round pick somewhere in the distant future. But it was a salary dump, not entirely a surprise. But before we talk about that, let's hear what the head coach, Dwayne Casey, had to say when you asked him about the day after about that deal to trade Andre Drummond.
Dwayne, thoughts on the trade yesterday, sending Drummond to the Cavs?
Well, it was a difficult day. People are people, and anytime you lose a person like Andre, who's a good man, who's a good connection with, and get to know over the couple of years that I've known him, it's tough. But it is a business, and again, you don't want to sound cold or anything like that. But every great player I've been with, there's either been a rumor or they've been traded. I remember going back to Gary Payton in Seattle. And he was Mr. Seattle at that time. And he was traded. It was tough. It was tough emotionally. It was tough for the team and the players because all these guys love Andre as we do, and so that part was tough.
All right, so. Again, this is not a surprise that Andre Drummond is no longer with
us.
Well, and I don't think to him either, although he sort of feigned being hurt there in the immediate aftermath of that. But yeah, I mean, it's not a surprise. The writing has been on the wall for months now, if not longer. You wrote about it in a story today about this rebuild being a long time coming. It's sort of just been this, to me, this sort of half-hearted attempt at a rebuild for a while now, but certainly with Andre having that option year in his contract,
it was scary.
Threw a wrench into their plans in terms of getting something in return, but they felt like they had to get rid of him.
Yeah, and
get rid of his salary.
For most of this time, I felt like Drummond should have opted in back in the summer when he kind of insinuated that he was going to opt out, because that gives the Pistons a little bit more trade leverage to say, hey, well, it's $28 million, but you get him another year, and so that scared away Atlanta, because the reports were early in January when they were going through that is they were working on a contract extension and they just couldn't agree on terms because he wanted more than they were willing to offer. And so I think that scared away everybody, the Knicks too, and maybe Charlotte, that they just couldn't get any kind of value for this contract. And so you get a 2023 Golden State second round pick that should be 58 or 59 or 60.
If it was the 2020 Golden State pick, you'd have something. Not so much 2023. I think they should be still pretty good then.
Right, and so that's the problem with it, that they wanted to get any kind of asset they could and some expiring contracts, which is all along what they were looking for in this. But just that fear, that specter of holding on to $28.8 million would have stalled their rebuild, and that was the reason that he was dealt. And his saying that he didn't know, I think, was more about he didn't know that it was going to be Cleveland.
Where he ended up, yeah.
Right, that it was going to be Cleveland, and now the reports coming out of Cleveland was that the Pistons and Cavs were talking about this on Wednesday, which really makes the Pistons look not so good, because if that's the case, then they could have broken off a phone call.
Indeed, yeah. The other thing, I mean, you mentioned they're scared off. Teams are scared off by the contract. I think to a certain extent they're scared off by the player, by the position he fills that is increasingly outdated in the NBA. And I do think there's a lesson there in the value that other teams, the rest of the league, frankly, placed on a traditional center in Andre Drummond. He wasn't going to draw a whole lot on the open market this summer, which is why he's opting in, perhaps, for that contract. I mean, he's not going to get a max deal as a free agent this summer, even in a summer where there's not a lot else on the free agent market. So I think that does speak to.
Yeah, and a couple other things at play is that the teams that did have cap money for this summer, which would have been Atlanta. And they blew all that on Clint Capella. The Charlotte probably is going to have some, and that was maybe the last team that was in that position. Right. And then the Knicks went out and did some things too. So given what his salary was going to be, the few number of teams that could fit him in their system as a traditional center, and then what the market was just going to be, it just didn't fit anymore. And again, how do you turn down $28 million and say, I'm going to go for something else, something more? It was hard for me to believe. I had written about it before that I just didn't think he was going to opt out, or maybe the best course for him was to opt in, and now it looks like that's what's going to happen.
And now he's hitting threes at a record-shattering clip in Cleveland. His debut last night obviously was the worst home loss in franchise history for the Cavs, so nothing new for Andre Drummond there in a losing effort. Some big stats, but he did. He hit 2 threes.
But they like him in Cleveland.
I know.
And it's John,
and he's going to get a chance.
It's John Beeline, too, and it looks like Kobe Altman, their GM, wants to have him there long term. And so if Tristan Thompson is on his way out, you can try to build some things around Drummond and their couple of young point guards. I think that's a reasonable gamble for them, a good fit for Drummond to try to figure it out. And, hey, he still gets his $29 million, so everybody's happy.
And, again, it's a team that's not giving up anything other than next
pick
year's cap space
in 2023.
The players coming back, obviously, they're expiring deals. You mentioned it, the cap space, the flexibility. I mean, Ed Stefanski, the senior advisor who's in charge, the de facto GM here in Detroit, he's been 2 years now. He's been talking about, my hands are tied.
Yep.
He has flexibility now. He has salary cap space. They're one of really just 5 or 6 teams heading into the summer that actually have cap space. The question I think fans have, and we'll get into a little bit of some of the other things they didn't do here, but also, I mean, look, what are they going to do with that cap space? Because in the this is now 9 of 11 years, they're not going to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
There have been some really poor decisions made in free agency with cap space in the last decade. I think that almost scares Pistons fans as much as is the alternative.
No, and I think the thing to remember here is this is a different front office than the previous ones, and they're going to be very shrewd in what they do. Because again, you could have let Drummond's contract expire and got nothing for him, and that sets your rebuild back a little bit of time. They did move that one. There were some other ones they didn't move. But even last year with Reggie Bullock, they flipped that and they get Svi Mykhailiuk. And that was so important to get a player with a name that they knew what they were getting and they had scouted him before, along with another second-round pick. They moved Stanley Johnson and got Thon Maker. This front office has shown that they will get rid of expiring contracts and try to get assets. And in free agency, they'll be shrewd. They got Derrick Rose on a cheap deal. They got other guys on cheap deal. Markieff Morris on like $3.5 million. Yeah. So they do well in assessing talent and putting that to a particular dollar value and not overpaying for guys. And I think that's going to be the tack that they take this summer is if there's nobody out there that earns it, then they're just going to hold on to it. And cap space has value. Fans, understand, cap space is an asset of value that you can use and take back bad money in trades and get other assets somewhere down the line. If you look at what Memphis did with Andre Iguodala, just take it in. You'll be able to trade it, or you can get more of it. So don't worry about what this front office is going to do. They've shown that they have the ability to make good decisions in free agency and also in trades and not get fleeced. And I think that's what's going to be the thing to watch more so is how they handle this cap space, what they do moving forward in acquiring more assets, and what the rest of this year looks like in the, not a tank, it's just one of these little motorized vehicles, but not a tank.
It's a stealth tank.
That's
how I've been referring to it.
Stealth tank.
They're 0-2 in the stealth tank era. No, I think you're right, and it's going to take fans some getting used to, but you're right, because that cap space doesn't necessarily mean you just go spend a bunch of money on Fred VanVleet from Toronto as a free agent. Now, they may go find a point guard go that route, but
depends on price for Fred VanVleet.
It's a way to it. You can force a team to attach a first-round pick to a contract they're trying to get rid of. And like I said, they are one of the few teams that will have that ability this summer.
About $35 million is significant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's literally 5 teams right now that can probably do something like that. So there were some other players that you thought, well, maybe you mentioned a couple of them that other teams might have interest in, more interest than, say, Andre Drummond's contract. Derrick Rose, staying put. Again, I don't think that was a surprise to me. Woj wrote about it last year, talked to Derrick Rose before the deadline, said he doesn't want to move. They don't want to move him. They love what he's been for them. And he's on a very reasonable contract for another year. So that opportunity to trade him is also still there next season.
Or in the offseason.
Or this summer.
If you go back to his introductory press conference, one of the first things that he said was that relationship with Arntello. And the only possibility I thought that he was going to move is that if they looked at it and it was the Lakers and they felt like the Lakers was a really good chance to get him a ring, then maybe they do it. They don't want to do it because the other side of it is they want to have a competitive team, because they'll have Blake Griffin. You can't be a true tanking team if you have Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose. Really either or, but both, you can't tank. So I think they'll come out and try to be competitive, but they'll probably not be able to move Blake Griffin's contract, and they'll assess what the market is for Derrick Rose's. And much like this year at the deadline, there were teams that were interested, but they want to have a team. They want to have a face that can sell tickets, and you can do it with Rose or you can do it with Griffin. I don't know if you can throw Svi Mykhailiuk and Sekou out there and sell a bunch of season tickets to people. You need a name. You need something that's going to get fans excited.
And look, they've talked about it in the immediate aftermath too, talked about the need to have some of those veteran guys around a team that's going to be chock full of young guys. I mean, they've got like 9 or 10 guys now under the age of 25 on this roster moving forward. Another couple, I mean, Luke Canard's name came up sort of toward the last few weeks before the deadline as a guy who
there was some smoke
they were
to
open
that
to listening to offers. Phoenix maybe got a little further than some other teams in regards to that. Did not move. I don't know if injury had anything to do with that, but it sounds like more like haggling over protections on a first-round pick.
And that's Jeff Bauer, the GM, the vice president of basketball operations in Phoenix, was the GM who drafted Luke Canard. And so there's some familiarity there. And if the Pistons, as was reported, if they were getting Phoenix's lottery pick this year and 2 young guards, the players don't necessarily matter in that case, but Phoenix's lottery pick can be another asset. Again, that if the Pistons end up somewhere in the 5, 6, 7, 8 range and they get Phoenix's as well, who says that they can't trade one of those and get down and get 2 picks for one, or trade up and get into the top 3 if they want to do that? Again, options and assets.
And then the other, you mentioned Markieff Morris on a very friendly deal, team-friendly deal right now, has an option year, I believe, for player option for next year. Langston Galloway's an expiring contract. Just not a lot of interest in terms of you're going to get a pick in the late second round, perhaps, for one of those guys. I don't know.
If it's there, and you have to read the tea leaves on what Ed Stefanski said, was that they usually try to do things like that with expiring contracts. But in the conference call, he said, you need 2 teams to tango. You need another team who's going to do that deal with you, which, if you read the tea leaves, kind of suggests that there might not have been a robust market. And maybe if it's something in the 50s, well, what are you going to do with a pick in the late 40s or early 50s? It's a small asset. But to the point that you made earlier about having veterans in the locker room, they really prize what Galloway brings in terms of work ethic, professionalism, everything else. And if you have a Bruce Brown, a Svi, those young guys, they need somebody to emulate. And it's not just, well, hey, Blake Griffin's in that locker room. Blake's doing a lot of rehab. He's sometimes there, sometimes not there. For the rest of this year, you need some mentors for those young guys.
So there it is. What wasn't done and what was done at the deadline. Now what's left? And I think as fans look at the team on the court, obviously there's not going to be a lot of wins these last however many games we got. They're 19 and 35 right now.
Yeah.
They are slowly moving towards contention for you're trying to get to that top 4.
Just in the top 4 is good enough.
And because I think people also don't understand maybe that Pistons haven't had a chance at one of those top 3 or 4 picks
since
well,
Darko.
You say it.
Yeah, I'll say
but no, they've flattened the lottery system to try to avoid tanking to the extreme. But they do have a chance, obviously, to move up. But they also have a chance. A guy like Christian Wood is the guy who gets probably the biggest opportunity now the rest of this season, with Andre Drummond out there playing, and he had started to already, but playing 30-plus minutes a night. He's a guy who's a free agent this summer, a guy they picked up off waivers and really have been impressed. I think everybody's been impressed with what they've seen so far.
Yeah, because he's so long and lanky at 6'11", and he can hit from 3, he can get to the rim, he can finish around the rim. But with these increased minutes, you're seeing what some of those assets are. And then some of the liabilities, too, is he's not a great rebounder like Drummond was. And so you're going to get out-rebounded. Some of those offensive rebounds that teams get, you know Drummond would have just soaked those up for you. So Christian Wood is going to get an opportunity, and he'll be an unrestricted free agent, but the Pistons will have his bird rights, meaning they can outbid any other team and go a little bit over. So I think that's where they're placing all of their eggs, is in that Christian Wood basket, to say, whatever that number is, by taking Drummond's contract off of the books, you better enable yourself to re-sign Christian Wood. And I don't know what that number is. It might be $6 million,
Right.
8, 10, who knows? But there are going to be teams who see that film, who see the skill set that he has at 6'11", and they're going to want him to. And teams could just artificially drive up the price just to make sure that the Pistons have that space, and they're going to use a lot of it to bring him back.
Yeah, no, and it could have been a problem in terms of trying to just fill out that roster for next season if Andre Drummond's here and you're trying to re-sign Christian Wood. And it's also worth noting that probably the name that they got more calls about than anybody, possibly, was Christian Wood. I mean,
Christian
he was
Wood,
the guy
yeah.
that teams were calling about because he is, like you said, he's a young player who's got some upside in this game. All right, so the rest of the young guys, I mean, what's left for them to show this season? And I guess who are you watching the most? I mean, I guess the obvious answer would be Sekou, perhaps, but
Yeah, I think it's Svi you're going to watch to see if he can do it on a consistent basis. Luke Canard, when he comes back, and it should be after the All-Star break that happens, whether he's going to be healthy and he can play that last stretch of games without any kind of injuries, because that's starting to become part of his tag, is that he's oft injured. That you want to see what Sekou can do, and you're starting to see some of that 19-year-old come out, is that, and that European style of play come out, is that he's going to the rim and it's really soft and his shots are getting blocked. And you can kind of see, well, yeah, that works in Lifetime Fitness. That doesn't work in the NBA. You got to go a little bit stronger. And so I want to see Sekou's development. I want to see if Svi can keep that up, if Canard can stay healthy, and then whether Bruce Brown really develops as a point guard or a two guard. He's been doing a little bit of both, but can he handle the ball? Can he run the offense and be an option for them? Because remember, if Tim Frazier's already gone, Brandon Knight is going to come off the books, Reggie Jackson is off the books, the only real point guard you have next year coming back under contract now is Derrick Rose. And so they're going to need some other help to figure out what the rest of that roster looks like.
you mentioned Reggie. We haven't talked about it. Is there a chance, you think, still of a buyout for Reggie Jackson the rest of this way?
There
Is that
could
something
be.
he would want? Is that something that...
I think he's starting to take on this mantle as the longest tenured Piston now that Drummond is gone, and he sees that he's got to coach up and mentor some of these young players. But I think that the attraction, if the roster spot holds with the Clippers, and they still have that, one of his good friends is Paul George, and that's been the rumor, is that he could be going to the Clippers in a buyout. It's hard to
It'd be hard
resist
to say
that
that,
opportunity
for
if
sure.
it's there. I think that's one of the things to watch in the next week or two as well.
Yeah, and then you mentioned Bruce Brown. Then suddenly Bruce Brown is back in that role where he was for a lot of the first half of the season.
Yep.
We heard from him off the top, and I guess the last thing I'll ask you is, Dwayne Casey came in here thinking one thing, perhaps, probably, and now it's a different reality. Probably not one that wasn't thought possible, but
Sure.
certainly not what everybody signed up, especially when the Blake Griffin trade happens. This is a team that's trying to win,
Trending a different direction.
trending in a different direction.
Yeah.
So how does he handle it? And to me, I think he's still actually well suited for this, based on his track record in Toronto, if nothing else.
Well, I think it's player development, and you're going to need those young guys to develop quickly this summer. And again, with Blake Griffin and with Derrick Rose, you're going to have an opportunity to be okay. And the East being what it's been, depending on how free agency works, and there aren't any significant names that are out there, the Pistons still could be in that 6, 7, 8 discussion if they get some significant improvement from some of their players. But again, if Rose is going to be on the trade market again next year, you doubt that they're going to make a serious push toward being in the 4, 5, or 6 seed, then yeah, you might be back in the same position. But he's known for his player development. You've seen some of this improvement from those players. How much of that can they do in the summer? And those first maybe 20, 30 games will tell a lot about what that trajectory is going to be.
And it's been talked about a lot organizationally, and certainly they've made a lot of investments on that end, the development end, obviously the new training facility downtown,
Yep.
but even further down the road with the G League team moving here to Detroit. That's definitely part of the master plan. It'll be interesting to see how they all handle it, and Blake Griffin too, how he handles the new reality of this if it doesn't trend in that direction again rather soon.
Right, and again, there's no getting off of that contract. You'd have to put a couple of draft picks to make as a sweetener to make some other team want to eat that Blake Griffin contract. And again, until he proves that he's what he was last season,
Right.
there's no team that's even going to sniff around for that. So that's kind of the way that that's looking. So it's again, it's not going to be a playoff push by any stretch of the imagination. This is the new normal. This is a rebuild with a lot of young
tank
guys.
season, right? Is that the new hashtag? No, I mean it is.
I got Tankathon in my bookmarks now, so we can.
Well, and it starts again, like we said. We're taping this on Monday. It starts tonight. Charlotte's in town, and then at Orlando, and then the All-Star break, and then. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
And then you can have your little mobile mini vehicle that moves towards.
That's right.
40 losses, 50 losses.
In the meantime, stick with Rod for all your Pistons coverage. Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. You're on all those things, I know. The Rod and Reel podcast, wherever you can find podcasts. And we'll be back here at the season end, I'm sure, for another one of these videos. Maybe sooner. I don't know. We'll see.
Enlightening.
Yes, indeed. All right. Thanks for joining us.